Hey guys, Tisha here, and we are back for another Counting the Cost chapter read. This is going to be chapter 6. Now, we left off with chapter 5, where Jim Bob and Michelle just popped up out of nowhere all the way to El Salvador to try to convince Jill and Derek, I guess, to come back so that they can be filmed for this show. So let's see where they are now. Before I get all the way into it, if you can do me a favor and ring that it wasn't coming out, that doorbell, which is that like button, hit that ding dong to let me know that you are here, that you are in the room, that the view that I'm seeing is not just a fluke. I will greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to leave comments down in that comment section there. I do read them and I do try my best to respond. And if I don't respond, someone in the fam will. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 6 is entitled No Agreement. The first week of August 2016, we boarded the plane for Northwest Arkansas. There was a lot to be thankful for and a lot to think about. Derek and I were both glad that we had been able to honor our promise to Mike, and we both were feeling like we had left behind good friends and a thriving ministry. It had been hard to say goodbye, even though we were only planning on being back in the U.S. for 2 to 3 months. We were due to attend 2 weddings, one for Derek's brother, the other for my sister Ginger, and do a ton of filming required for the show. The weddings I was super excited about, the filming not so much. There were extensive plans for the crew to follow us as we all prepared for the wedding, plus capture a ton of everyday activities like going to the grocery store so that we could talk about all the things we missed while we've been away. I gotta be honest right quick before I continue. I really hate the fact that she brings us to the point of something, leaves us on what is a cliffhanger, and then starts something else. Because I thought we were going to pick up from her mom and dad popping up at the house unannounced all the way in El Salvador. But we're picking up with them being done with El Salvador and being back home. I don't like that, Jill. I don't like that. I want you to finish your thoughts. Because I'm like, ooh, suspense. And then, ooh, I'm back and it's something else. It's still a good book, though. The final flight on the long journey home was anything but settled. Israel was just a year old and didn't want to sit still for more than a few minutes at a time. Inside, I felt just as restless, just as unsettled. The closer we got home, the worse I felt. A few months earlier, we finally received a partial copy of the infamous contract that Chad had mentioned. Okay, let me be quiet because maybe we are going to get a little something here. Not the whole contract, but a few excerpts, including a clause that stated I had to reveal to the network if I discovered I was pregnant, as well as the final page that had mine and my siblings' signatures inked in. You would think that she would know that she signed that, but her father was cunning. I just got to call it like I see it. The signature page was instantly familiar, especially when I read the date that I signed it, June 20th, 2014, which was the day before Derek and I were married. The day Pops had told me that he had some simple papers for us all to sign in the dining room, saying that it only had to do with how we were going to get paid, not that we ever received any wages for any of our work. I've been furious when I found out, but now that we were heading back to see the family for the first time, I was calmer, but I was still nervous. So with the teachings that they have, what her father did, I want to know if it was right. If the IBLP feels like it was right for her father to trick her and her siblings into signing that paperwork when they had no knowledge of what they were signing. The whole family was waiting for us. So was the film crew, which left me wondering just how honest the hugs and the welcome backs and the we love yous really were. I wouldn't even want them to meet me. I'm just saying. It turned out that they were genuine. Once the cameras left and we were back at the big house, it was like the whole Houston shoot conflict had never happened. I even began to hope that Pop's apology when he and Mom had showed up that day was completely genuine. We hadn't spoke much since then. Maybe he'd come around to our way of thinking and would be willing to talk about paying us fairly for our work. Maybe he saw the true value of what we were doing in El Salvador, and he wouldn't have to lessen its importance in comparison to the show all the time. And so, with every conversation, every shared meal, every moment that I braced for impact and didn't get chewed out by Pops, I could feel myself relaxing. So she was on the edge of her seat because some kind of way her father still managed to get her to come out there and do filming. Maybe not when he wanted it to, but he still got what he wanted. And she's bracing herself for the impact of what may come from that conversation that they had with their dad. I don't like it. There were still a ton of questions floating around in my mind about that contract and why Pops had tricked me into signing it, and I still felt uneasy about the way he tried to drive a wedge between Derek and me on that phone call, but I was okay with leaving those for another day. We were going to enjoy the short time we had planned to spend home, then return to the mission field, ready for another period of service. It didn't take long for that settled peace to change, but this disruption wasn't anything to do with Pops or the show. It wasn't even a bad thing. What threw our plans into the air was all down to me and Derek. I got pregnant again. In any other year, nothing would have changed. Derek and I would have happily moved back to El Salvador just a few weeks later, confident that the little one would grow just as well in my womb down in Central America as it would back in the States. But 2016 wasn't any other year. The Zika virus was raging across Latin America, and it posed an even higher risk to women in their early stages of pregnancy. Ultimately, due to filming demands, including a promotional shoot in December we were required to attend, we had to wait until at least the end of the year to return to El Salvador. Mike was gracious and said he understood, and we agreed that we returned soon after the shoot. Besides keeping Diller baby number 2 healthy, it allowed us to be fully available for whatever the show required. So here she is again, doing what the show wants. And Derek, I gave you a whole bunch of props. Why are you not stepping up, sir? I gave you a whole bunch of props, and so did my family in the comment section. Even though mine and Jess's names were in the title, the show actually divided its focus among several of us older kids. Jana, John David, Joseph, Josiah, Joy, and Anna and Anna were all featured in addition to us. And with Ginger engaged to Jeremy and another wedding on the horizon, we weren't as much of a focus as we had been in the very first few seasons of Counting On. After 13 years of filming, almost half my life, I was finally starting to imagine a future without it. Derek and I enjoyed having time and space to talk and dream and pray about what our lives might look like once we completed the second year in El Salvador. We loved being part of the mission project, but our time was coming to an end. At the same time, our baby was growing secretly inside me. We were also starting to nurture plans for what we might do next in our lives. Family meeting, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Pop's text came through early one October morning to a group made up of the older kids. Pops was always sending messages to different ones of us. Those who lived at the big house, those who were older, and those who were younger, but not the smallest kids. Married kids, single kids. But there was something triggering about being called to a family meeting. The wounds from the last few that I'd attended were still raw. When Pop started by talking about Josh, it all sounded so familiar. He's had a few more struggles, Pop said once everyone had sat down and the door was closed. Why is it that they only have meetings that concern Josh or protecting Josh and them? Y'all already know that Josh has recently got his own car lot, and so we feel like it's best for him to go out on his own now. Pop stopped. His words were typically vague, designed to shut debate down, not invited in. So while there was a ton of questions that we could have asked, nobody said anything. Our main job in these family meetings was usually just to listen. Substantive issues were not up for discussion. But it turned out that the meeting wasn't about Josh after all. Anyway, Pop said, smiling, Mom and I have been talking, and some of the boys are getting older and are to the point where they could use some money to help move on in life. and we thought it might be a good idea for you guys to have a little bit of money so y'all can do what you need to do in life. We want to give you each $80,000. So they were getting a lot of money. They got a lot of money. Because now all of a sudden, even though at this point she's been filming for like 13 years, now you want to give her $80,000. And I had to read that again to make sure that thing said 80. Where am I at? 80, yes, $80,000. And I'm guessing some of you will use it to start your own business, buy homes, or whatever to get yourself started. The room burst into a chorus of surprise and gratitude. And all my life, I'd hardly ever been more surprised by something that Pop said. You know, he continued once the room was quieter. You guys can thank Derek for this. Okay, Derek. Woo, woo. I take it back, Derek. I take it back. You did it, Derek. You did it. He's been talking to me about paying for some of you guys. To everybody else, the comment was a throwaway, but to Derek and me, sitting side by side, it was a trigger. I was glad Pops had finally decided to pay something outright to some of the kids, and glad too that he recognized Derek for his involvement in the process. But my mind took me back to the human bedroom that we sat in with Pops before Christmas. Derek looking confused and exacerbated, Pops looking mad, me feeling like I was in a whole world of trouble, bracing for impact as the plane hurled toward Earth. I swallowed my feelings and reached for my husband's hand. I gave him 3 squeezes, received 4 in return, and waited to see if Pops was going to say anything else about Derek and me. He didn't. All I'm going to need is for y'all to sign something. Oh my goodness. Here he goes again with his trickery. I'm going to give you $80,000, but you got to sign something. Why not just give them the $80,000? Go ahead and have your little tax write-off or whatever. But you want them to sign something because he's still up to his old tricks. I'm having the paperwork drawn up now. Once you sign, I'll get you the money. As soon as we were alone, Derek said exactly what I was thinking. I don't get it. It raises many questions. Why 80,000? Why now? And what's it for? Is this getting us paid for the shows we've already done, or is it a gift? We talked late into the night, but got nowhere. We felt frustrated to be left with so many questions and only Pops to answer them. And based on recent history, we didn't feel comfortable taking all of our questions to him anyway. A discussion might just leave us with no real information again and more heartache. Maybe Pops was just being generous, but both of us felt sure that there was some angle he was playing. After all, 13 years of filming as a family had taught that everything has a cost. Plus, Pop's lifestyle alone told us that the show had generated a lot more than the equivalent of $80,000 each. So she's finally putting 2 and 2 together. At first, the changes had been subtle. We enjoyed more extravagant presents at Christmas, newer RVs to transport us together. And I noticed when Pops had started making bigger and more generous gifts to people in need. But as the show had grown, Pops had been able to buy more and more rental properties. He continued to be generous, often allowing several of his houses to be used by friends or family at discounted rates or even completely rent-free. It took a few days for the mist to clear and for us to suspect that the money wasn't just a simple gift. First, there was a comment from Pops about how none of us needed to discuss the money with anyone else, either inside or outside the family. If you have any issues, don't go stirring up contention among brethren, he said. You come to me. He keeps using scripture for his convenience rather than completing what comes after it or before it. A few weeks later, the paperwork came through, a 4-page agreement emailed over by Chad. I don't trust Chad. After having been tricked into signing the previous contract, Derek and I were extra careful to study this one, showing it to a lawyer along with the portions of the previous agreement we'd been given. If we were going to sign Pop's new deal, we wanted to be clear about what we were giving up. The contract wasn't with TLC or any other network. It was with Mad Family Inc., a company that Mom and Pops had previously set up. So we want to keep blaming TLC for certain things, and they are very much so to blame. But as I said before, Jim Bob and his little wife Michelle, they're to blame too. In return for the $80,000 for the next 7 years, plus an unlimited number of years beyond that if the company chose, we would have to commit to making not just ourselves, but our children and any children yet to be born available to any show that Mad Family Inc. created or participated in. We would be paid for that work as well, but at a rate that we would have to accept without negotiation. We would also have to sign an NDA, which will remain active for the rest of our lives. $80,000 was a lot of money, but these strings were tight enough to choke. Not for no 7 years. $80,000 isn't a lot of money at all. Not for 7 years and for the rest of your life. $80,000 is a trick, and it's an easy way for him to get some of y'all to get off of his case and to make you guys feel like you're getting some money. But if he has $80,000 to give to each one of you all, that shows the type of nest egg that he had and how much money he was being paid. Derek and I didn't even need a discussion. There was no way either of us were going to sign. Not that we told Chad or Pops that right away. We figured it would be wise to hold off on saying no to Pops until we absolutely had to. Pops had been clear that we were not to talk about the deal with anyone else, either each other, our siblings, or anyone outside the family. To me, at the time, the level of secrecy and control that Pops exerted on us felt normal, but it's not. He didn't want them to disclose their findings to each other. He didn't want them to read it. We had been conditioned to obey, and it wouldn't have occurred to me to see it as the hypocrisy in the fact that he would warn us against stirring up contention among the brethren while also using us against one another and dumping us into signing contracts. Right. Most were scared enough of Pop's displeasure to obey, but not everyone did what he said. A few siblings asked us whether we were going to sign. I told them no, choosing my words carefully, fearful of stirring up family problems. I was surprised that almost everyone I spoke to felt fine about signing. Some said they had some edits they wanted to make to the agreement first, but I started to feel like they were being swept away by a soon-to-become treacherous river. I wanted to jump in and save them, but I wasn't sure I had that kind of power. Signing a deal with Mad Family Inc. felt like jumping on board a paper aircraft. Nothing about it felt safe, but that didn't mean we were down on Pops. Things weren't great between us, but it was late fall 2016 now, and almost a year had passed since we had argued with him on the phone in El Salvador. We hadn't fought since then, and inside me, there was just a small flame of hope that somehow we might be able to find and build stronger relationships in the future. A few short weeks later, we were on Duggar family trip in Branson, Missouri at Thanksgiving when things changed. A month had passed since we'd been given the contract to sign, and Derek and I had been talking a lot and praying about everything that had been happening recently, trying to figure out how we could navigate things better with Pops. After getting some advice from an attorney outside the family circle of influence, Derek and I agreed that the next step would be to ask Pops to hand over a full copy of the contract that he had me sign the day before our wedding. He already sent us part of it in June, but seeing the whole thing felt like a good opportunity for him to be transparent and open with us. He was resistant. At least he was playing the same stalling game on the 2014 contract that we were playing on Pop's $80,000 one. But on vacation, when we weren't all crowded on top of each other like we often were at home, there was an opportunity to talk with Pops face to face. We were sitting a little removed from everyone else at a table in an empty corner at Fritz Adventure, a kids' climbing place in Branson, Missouri, when Pops walked over and sat down. I feel like there's still something between us, he said. There was a pause. Derek and I looked at each other. Well, yes, Derek said. There's been some trust broken recently that might take a while to rebuild. It goes both ways. You've broken my trust too. His stare was rock solid. I could taste the bile in my throat. I feared that things were about to get ugly again. Then Pop surprised me. I'm sorry, he said. I hadn't heard him say that many times before. The words sounded unfamiliar, but I liked them. I don't think that he really means it, Jill. Don't get excited, girl. I think that your father is very calculated in his moves. At least I did until he finished his sentence. I'm sorry that I didn't let you know you were obligated to. But Jill never read the contract she was signing, so she wasn't obligated to anything, said Derek, trying hard to hold his frustration in check. Will you admit that? Pop shrugged. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry for making her agree to something she wasn't obligated to. Thanks, Pops, I said. We forgive y'all and love y'all too, and really hope we can move forward and have a great family relationship. Later, when everyone was talking about what they were thankful for, I wondered what to say. I was thankful for my mom, and I was thankful for Pops too. I was thankful for my husband, my son, and the little life growing in my belly. But most of all, what I really wanted to say was that I was thankful for my husband and his bravery and courage despite the obstacles we had faced together that year. In all the stress of things with the family, he was my biggest champion, and together we were learning to take back control of our lives, one small decision at a time. The closer we got to the end of the year, the more pressure we came under to sign the agreement. We talked about it, prayed about it, and slept on it a whole lot. But even though Chad and Pops were persistent and persuasive, we just couldn't get any peace about signing anything at all. Yes, we wanted that money, even though it was nowhere near an accurate compensation for the hours and days and years spent filming, but we did not want to be tied up in any legal agreement with Pops to get it. I guess Pops felt the same way because in the last few days of December, he visited us at home. I wanted to hide. I wanted everything to go away. I didn't want to have to pour concrete around my heart in an attempt to shield me from the blast. But Pops wasn't there to fight. He was there to hand over a check for the full $80,000. What about the agreement, Derek asked. I know y'all have been thinking over the contract and talking with Chad about revisions, and we had hoped to get all that wrapped up before the end of the year, but we can continue those conversations. Mom and I talked about this, and we really want to go ahead and give y'all payment now. We really love you guys. Y'all. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Thank you, Pops, I said. I meant it, but I wasn't rejoicing. Somehow it didn't feel like the end of the story. Our return to El Salvador got pushed back from December to February, thanks to a combination of filming commitments and safety concerns that Mike had. The time went quickly, and before we knew it, we only had a couple of weeks left in Arkansas. Aside from packing up and sourcing supplies that we wanted to take with us, there was one other task that we simply had to complete before we boarded the plane. We needed to find a lawyer. Ever since In Touch magazine had published a story a year and a half earlier, my sisters and I had wanted to do what we could to right the wrongs legally and hopefully help protect other victims. We couldn't undo the damage and the pain that we had experienced, and the humiliation was unerasable. But hopefully, we could get justice. We could hold to account the people who were complicit in the illegal release of the documents relating to the investigation. Kathy O'Kelly, the city of Springdale, Arkansas, Washington County, Arkansas, Ernest Kate, Rick Hoyt, In Touch magazine and its parent company, and anyone else involved behind the scenes. Pops had tried another law firm previously, but they didn't take the case. Now in February 2017, time was against us. The statute of limitations was approaching, and we had to file by May. If we couldn't find a law firm to take us on, our window of opportunity would close forever. What made it even more of a challenge was the fact that none of us could afford to pay for it. Even with Pop's $80,000 gift, in quotes, he offered to loan us the money, but I didn't feel at all good about being in debt to him. What's interesting is their father didn't hesitate to put up money for Josh and his rehabilitation, and Josh and his attorney fees, and Josh and his court fees, and Josh and Josh and Josh and Josh. But here, your kids were humiliated, and you're not willing to just put that up. Why do they have to take a loan from you? Because once again, he didn't care. So we needed a firm that could take on local government elected officials and a national media organization and do it in contingency. It was a tall order, but thanks to a contact of my new brother-in-law, Jeremy, we found a firm in LA that thought we had a strong enough case and was willing to take a risk on us. When Pops heard, he called me. The muscle memory was strong, and I braced for impact, worrying that he might be upset we hadn't included him or Chad on the process. But his voice was calm, his words genuine. I'm so proud of you guys. I'm glad you find somebody. I don't really buy it, because why didn't you help them find it? I exhaled a little with relief, but he added, I would be very careful about how you approach all of this, We just got the show back. Okay, Pops. Love you. So in every little turn, he's worried about the show, not the girls. This is what I'm talking about. I was concerned about the show. I was concerned about Pops too. I didn't want to wreck the peace that was starting to form between us, as fragile and weak as it was, but I was relieved that my sisters and I had an attorney of our own to help us with this. LA was a long, long way from Arkansas, and for once I felt confident that Pops wouldn't be able to exert his control over the situation. Finally, we could fight for ourselves. Soon after we arrived back in El Salvador, we had a call with a large mission organization, the International Mission Board of IMP, who we had a job interview with at a missionary expo, the same organization that Derek had previously worked with and the one we had made contact with soon after our honeymoon. Their process was slow, requiring us to be part of their church denomination for 3 years. With that hurdle finally clear, we were beginning to have some more detailed conversations about us working with them. The fact that we were already known through the show probably would have made a lot of organizations nervous about attracting too much attention to their sensitive work and pass us up, but the IMB was willing to look at us. And though being well known meant that some of our job options within this organization would be limited, we were excited. It felt like we found gold. We liked everything about them, their mission, their values, the way they operated in support of their missionaries, and had been so happy when they'd made the previous offer to join them. They sent missionaries all over the world, and they suggested that we might either want to go to Spain or Panama. Starting work with Mike after our initial interview with him had been pretty simple. All we needed to do was agree on the scope of the work, iron out a few details and about the funding and accommodation, and book our flights. But with the IMB, things were a bit different. It was a lot bigger, had been around over 150 years, and the steps we had to take were way more complex. There were training courses to attend, vetting procedures to pass, and interviews with potential mission partners to have. On average, it took between 2 and 4 years to go from being accepted as a missionary to actually being sent out onto the mission field. We've been working through it for a while, and we were finally deemed to be almost ready. Finally, we were able to let ourselves get excited about this new chapter opening. The call was pretty routine, but there was one question that caught us off guard. We just want to double check. Is there anything that you guys can and can't do with the whole filming thing you do with your family, Jill? You mean contractually, I said? Yeah. Do you have any formal agreements that you signed that will restrict your ability to completely be committed to your work? Derek and I squeezed hands out of sight off the camera. Well, yes, he began. There's an agreement Jill was tricked into signing the day before our wedding, but we don't feel obligated to it morally or legally because the way the signature was gained. There was a moment's silence. The man we were talking to looked confused. Derek glanced at me. We're happy to cut ties with anything film related though, aren't we? I nodded. We're ready to do that. Then I reiterated, we will quit the show right now to show you that we are serious about working with you. Well, okay then, the guy was smiling. That's great. If you can provide us documentation that shows you are free from any contract, that will be just perfect. It was strange to have talked about leaving the show with someone other than Derek. We had been speaking about it between ourselves for almost a whole year, and the timing just felt right. But knowing that our secret was now out in the world, it felt strange, it felt dangerous, and it felt liberating too. All those whispered conversations between us about when we should leave the show had taken forever. Now that we had decided to leave, we needed to figure out how we were going to do it. And for that decision, we didn't have the luxury of time. We needed to press on to get things moving so that we could secure our release from the show in time to start a new post on the mission field within the next year. We drafted 2 versions of the email. The first was a simple and clear resignation letter that we addressed to everybody we could think of at TLC and Discovery, the parent channel, and the production company. We gave them all the end date of May 31st, 2017, and said we'd be back in Arkansas in mid-May and would make ourselves available to do any filming they wanted. We didn't copy Pops or chat on it because we wanted to convey that we were capable adults who can make decisions and communicate with the network for ourselves, plus go out as cleanly and with as little interference as possible. The second email we drafted to Chad. We just wanted to let you know, after much prayer and consideration, to step back from the show. As of the end of May 2017, we feel like we're not supposed to be a part of the show anymore in any capacity. We read it and reread both of them until I could recite them in my sleep. We talked long and hard about what might happen when we sent them. We talked about staying in our box, sticking firm to what we knew was the right thing for us to do. We talked and talked until there was nothing left to say. I felt terrified, so terrified that I started having contractions. I had just entered my 3rd trimester stretch and 29 weeks pregnant. Oh, that's not good. All I could do was breathe and hope that everything would work out right. Last minute, we decided it would be better and more respectful to call my parents first before the network instead of emailing them. So we prayed, picked up the phone, and holding back tears, my stomach in knots, called my parents. They were both on the call. The tears started flowing and soaking the shirt that covered my pregnant belly as we let them know of our decision to quit filming at the end of May. I anticipated a difficult reaction or arguments as we had in the past, but that didn't happen. We kept the call short. They were calm and didn't ask any questions. They didn't say much, but thanked us for letting them know. After we hung up, we pressed send and the emails and waited. The fallout was instantaneous. Chad emailed back demanding to know who else we had sent the email to. TLC emailed back to wanting to talk. We told them that we were happy to have a call and share our side of the story. We wanted to explain how we've been in the dark about things with the contract. At first they agreed, but then Chad must have gotten wind of the call because they looped him in on the email thread, and all of a sudden the network wasn't allowed to talk with us unless Chad was on the call too. So this is the same Chad that they try to get to help them that I said that I didn't trust. From then on, it was Groundhog Day, the same challenge over and over again. Every time we tried to get TLC to give us something that showed we were released from the contract, we hit a brick wall. We still only had a partial copy of the June 2014 contract, and neither Chad nor Pops would give us the full thing, even though they had asked for it a long time ago. Meanwhile, we were left trying to convince the IMB that the months-long delay was only temporary and that soon enough we hopefully have the legal release they were requesting. About the only thing that appeared to be going well was my pregnancy. Those anxiety-inducing contractions had only lasted a day or so and not progressed into labor. We tried to make the most of our last weeks in El Salvador, despite all the Duggar family mess and all the show-related chaos that we had experienced throughout our time there. We felt deeply connected to the people we had worked with. I had grown especially close with the pastor's wife, Maria. She was the sweetest, and I knew that she would always be there whenever I needed help. Leaving her and everyone else was going to be hard, especially as the security situation had deteriorated even further in the previous months. Our former guard, German, was another of the friends we would miss the most. We had known him for a while, and he had always helped to translate and make people laugh. His wife made the best chocolate, which we would buy whenever we needed a treat. He told us that his favorite meal was the hamburgers we cook him. German had been a member of MS-13, one of the brutal gangs responsible for so much of the killing in El Salvador. He had become a Christian and was a regular at church, but even that wasn't enough to keep his past from catching up with him. There were rumors that he was a target and that if he carried on working with us, we would become a target too. That's so sad. It was hard, but we knew that we had to let German go. We stayed in touch after he stopped working as our guard, though, and he came to see us several times with his family. 1 month before we were supposed to go back to the States, we got the call that German had been murdered. Derek and I were stunned and devastated. All the chaos and all the trauma that the show had thrown into our lives was nothing compared to German's murder. We had known the risk when we started our work in El Salvador, but a part of me never thought the danger would ever get that close to us. The sorrow seemed to hang over the whole valley. For weeks, I felt empty inside. Compared to the previous August, everything felt different when we flew back to Northwest Arkansas in mid-May 2017. All my dials were turned up to the max. My anxiety about how people would respond to us, my fear that things were going to explode, and my sense that we were returning to somewhere that felt less and less like home. The sadness I felt at leaving El Salvador weighed heavier in my heart than I thought possible. We were both stressed out about the ministry fundraising as well. Ever since we stood our ground about the promo shoot, it seemed to us that Chad's fundraising efforts had declined. That's because Chad is for your father. He's not for you. We were still technically paying him 10% of anything raised, but barely any money was coming in. We still had our personal money, the $80,000 Pops had paid us. But if we were going to be serious about life on the mission field and still have some savings for our future, we needed a solid network of supporters. As we returned to Arkansas, our Dillard Family Ministry bank balance had $1,500 in it. There was frustration too. We had been unable to secure any kind of document confirming our release from the show, and eventually the IMB could only wait so long. They reiterated to us that unless something changed with the contract deal in the next few months, we were in danger of losing the job opportunity we've been waiting for in Panama. The fact that these people were able to do this and hold them up like this, and their father played with them like this because he had a copy of the contract, further makes me despise this man. I cannot stand that you're making this woman who is pregnant at the time be stressed out about this because she didn't want to sign this thing and she doesn't want to be a part of the show. Let her go. And yet, there was hope growing inside me, unaware of anything else in the world that might be troubling me or Derek. Our second baby was thriving. I was very pregnant, over 33 weeks along now, and everything was looking good for the final weeks. Excuse me. In spite of all the stress and uncertainty around our future, there was one thing that we still agreed on with Mom and Pops. This new life we were about to welcome into the world was nothing less than a blessing. With no job lined up, no knowledge of whether we would ever be able to get out of our contract, we battled hard to keep ourselves positive. Our little one, a boy, was doing 6 weeks after we landed, and we would spend much of our time until then either getting ready for my sister Joy's upcoming wedding or filming our final interviews for the show. Of course, at some point from the show, someone from the show asked whether we'd be willing to have cameras in when I went into labor. We didn't need to think twice about answering them. Absolutely no way, we said, on multiple occasions. So they already said no, and they're still being asked over and over again about it. But this is what production and TLC and their father did, because I'm blaming them all. But there was a real curveball waiting for us, and it came from Chad. He informed us that he was no longer able to work with Dillard Family Ministries, and he was resigning from our board. That didn't surprise either of us at all. It was kind of a relief. Yeah, because he wasn't doing anything for except taking 10%. What troubled us was when we happened to check the balance on the ministry bank account. Chad had withdrawn almost all of it, leaving us with only a few $100s in the ministry account that we used to pay ourselves waged. We confronted him, and he gave us some story about a CPA bill being due, even though what he was paid was supposed to cover those expenses. The whole thing tasted bitter. Maybe another day we would have fought harder, but right then, with so much on our plate and with the future so full of unknowns, neither of us had the appetite for another battle. We just wanted to get through the next transition in our lives. There was just one last loose end to tie off before we were free. The show. The producers asked if we could block out 5 hours so that they could film some final exit interviews with us that they could use to tell the viewers of our decision to leave the show. It seems strange to me now, but I don't remember much at all about the last interviews that we filmed for Jill and Jessica counting on. I know what I was feeling, a mix of sorrow and gratitude, of relief and anxiety, a feeling of happy that this was all behind us now, at the same time as wondering what's coming next. But I don't recall what we said. I would have been like, I'm not filming anything until I get my contract that says I'm done. They got taken advantage of on so many terms. I remember them asking us to give them a few different versions of our decision to leave the show. I don't think any of it ended up making it into the final cut of the show. Part of me still wonders why they didn't bother to explain to the viewers why we left. Part of me knows that it didn't matter. Other than that, as far as I recall, there was nothing to mark the end of our involvement with the show. No speeches said and no final paperwork that we had to complete. We just finished answering whatever questions we've been asked, and the room fell into a brief silence. That's it, said the cameraman. We stood up from the couch where we'd been interviewed hundreds of times before in the shop building turned studio that sat at the front of the big house property. Nobody from my family was there, so once we said our goodbyes to the film crew, we just walked back to the car and drove home. That was it. For us, the show was over. We were out. Getting back onto the mission field was harder than we'd hoped it would be, but at least we were now free to do what we wanted, free to relocate, to build our lives the way we wanted them to be built, free to raise our boys without any of the complications that I'd experienced. Part of me was excited. Part of me found it more terrifying than anything I'd ever encountered, like a lifer who had just been unexpectedly released. I felt dazed and unsure about this new world ahead of me. It was all too vast, all too unknowable. I was just 26 years old. Derek held me close those nights, him, me, and the little one, pushing the skin so tight across my belly that you could see the outline of the little foot or elbow on the other side. You see, said Derek, whenever our baby in utero would kick and squirm, everything is going to be all right. And that is the end of that chapter. I feel like this is good. I like that she's telling us all these things, but I feel like she's still holding back. And you all, at this point, we're going to be on page 171. So I hope that in the last I think that gives us like 100 pages left. I hope that she really tells us some of these things and she puts it all together. I'm enjoying the book. Let me know how you feel down below. I want to know who is worse in this situation, because I already asked the question about who y'all feel is to blame. But I want to know, who do you feel is worse? Do you feel like Jim Bob is worse? Or do you feel like Michelle is? Because Michelle is playing the dutiful wife, but Michelle's name is on some of this stuff too. Anyways, thanks for watching, you guys. Until next time.